Excellent. Okay, so how do we break down the figure? Because there's a lot of information, a lot of ways to approach it, and it's very confusing because there's just so much detail here. Difficult to make sense of all of it. But the first thing we want to do is pull from the information that we already have. So we've already done some figure drawing and we've already done some basic forms. So when it comes to setup and measuring, we already know like, okay, I should break this down in a way that makes sense. And that's, when we get into like our little figure drawing stuff that we did, making things out of like basic shapes. So like, our basic spheres, we're having cylinders for the arms. We're combining this with our gesture drawing, making those shapes that look nice to us. All that other fun stuff that we learned earlier, just to make our basic stickman. And then once we have a basic idea of what we want, that's when we go in and we try to just do things in steps like we did before. So if we're painting, obviously we want to start with our line sketch, the stuff we learned from gesture, basic line art, and then for now, if we want to make it simple, just fill it in with one color. Now, if this is in grayscale, which the first drawing will be, obviously that's just going to be one value. So if we were to look at this in terms of value, aside from our line art, we just want to pick one area on the gray map here that looks close enough between how light my image is and how dark it is. So I came up with a value like this. With skin color, it's just the same thing. What's like a neutral tone in between my darks and my lights. And we just want to use that as a basis to get started here. Again, we don't want to be thinking about everything at once when we're doing a setup. We want to be getting rid of all these independent variables and making this process as simple as possible. So we have our line art from the stuff we learned earlier, and then a flat color. The next thing we want to do is prep our light environment. I went very, very conservative with this. However, all I did here for prepping was I went, which direction is the light coming from, and can I make part of my basic one value here slightly lighter where the light source is and slightly darker where the darks are. And all that looks like here is just taking like a gradient tool or a soft brush, like your airbrush, uh, assigning like a very dark value, and then pushing the darks where the shadows are being cast, so we have them coming in at the stomach here, and then taking an opposite light value and then just prepping it so that we're getting light coming in towards the top, because obviously light source is coming in from over here. And once we have that prepped, again, for me, I just made it a bit more subtle. You can go as dark as you want. But once we have that prepped, then we can think about darks. So we're going to do the same thing again. However, now we're going to block. Since the first few sessions we were thinking about forms, so, if we want to find out what's happening in the body, and we want to make that look 3D, we want to break it down into forms. Same thing with lighting and rendering. If we want to render and light this complicated shape, let's bring up those forms that we found earlier and then just block them out as simply as possible. So that's what we did here. Oop, wrong layer. That's what we did here. We just took a dark value. I chose more. Oh, my buttons here freaking out. Give me 1 second. There we go. All right, so I just chose like one value. And I have it clipped to the layer below. And all I did was just go through and try to block in where I saw dark parts of the body. And again, since we're blocking here, we're not really worried about detail. We're just trying to find general large areas of shadow for that first pass. Because this is going to prep our other forms. Again, if we're seeing this arm as a cylinder, well, we know that there's a dark and light point of the cylinder, and then we know that there's going to be a terminator. So what we're prepping in the shadows is just light area, dark area, and then the terminator in the center. Just as if it was a simple cylinder. And then once we have our darks in, we do the same thing again, our lights. And same dealio, looking at parts of the body as simple shapes, and then filling them in. And then from here, we can just refine what we did. So we're just trying to have a bit more unity. So all this is just cleaning that up a bit and being like, okay, if this area is light on the shoulder or on the bicep here, and this area is dark, I want to get a nice representation between the simple forms that I set up, and then just give them a bit more unity so that they're not as messy. And then we can see from here, if we want to start using like soft brush, I just started prepping this with the time that I gave myself. But we can see that from here, if we want to start rendering, if we want to start thinking about more complicated muscles and getting into the detailing here, we've just made this process a lot simpler because we went from like the minefield of like a line drawing with no detail at all, very hard to parse all of this out, very complicated, and we essentially just built a frame in order to make finding all of that information and setting it up very simple. So the simple process for this would obviously just be line art, considering forms, considering the gesture, assigning a base color, assigning a dark value, a light value, and then working from there. And of course, this is a suggestion when we're thinking about how do we draw the figure in color, how do we render out a figure to make it look 3D. This is a method that I like to use to make things simpler. If you have a different method in mind, if you have another setup you want to go with, knock yourself out. This is just to make it easier for people who are broaching this for the first time. As always, I'll share this, what everyone did in the channel, as well as the live session itself. Seems like I'm slow. Well, here's the real. How often do you draw full figures? It's the thing I rarely draw. Yeah, so you're not slow, it's just you haven't done a lot of them. You need more time to think. So we have our two here from Benji. I'm just dropping them in real quick so everyone sees them. And as I like pull them up, if someone's like, "Hey, can you go over this? Can you give me some pointers on how to improve it?" If you want me to do that, I'm more than happy to spend a couple minutes on them. But, here we have Benji. I'm gonna save the stuff from Twisted until later. I just want everyone to get to see what people were working on. Have If Ghosts, the nice traditional sketch here. Did you have one or another one? I was trying to like quickly doodle traditional since I was streaming. So I busted out the colored pencils for the second one. Seems like it. And also to get as much as you did, Nemo. It's pretty good. Don't sleep on yourself. A lot of people takes them a lot longer. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to, in the beginning, come up with a strategy for tackling all this. Because I feel like if you haven't done it at all before, um, it can make it take even longer, and then like you never get to not a rendering stage, because I think 30 minutes is pretty quick regardless, but you never even get to like a stage where you're putting stuff down that looks interesting. So I tried to come up with a simple method to where you're able to at least make some shapes you like. These two are from Lumi, by the way. Very nice, like oily drawings with these two. Let me take another look at the colored one. Yeah. It reminds me a lot of the early sketches from Darkest Dungeon, the way they implement the darks into the like lighter skin tones. And then very good capture of the contrast here with how light it gets. Very cool stuff. And then coming up we have Mr. Nemo with his work. Same dealio. I really like how you made them pastel looking, you know. Very cool. Ah, here's the other one from If Ghosts. Good, I'm glad you were able to get both done. Did not like me using watercolor? Yeah. Gotta get the paper for it, unfortunately. Yeah, Mr. Twisted here. Very elegant. Very skinny. It doesn't suck. It just if you ever say that your art sucks, you're just not good at analyzing it. I like how elegant it looks. I like how we have, for the lighting, if we wanted to incorporate some sort of lighting like this later, the very thin outlines, which creates room for bounce light later on. And I mean, in terms of like, it sucks. It's just there are areas that we could pop out or move forward or backward. And then like there's stylistic changes we could make if we wanted to. So like where could I block in things to make like different structures that are interesting looking pop out? I don't think too thick. I actually think we could have more areas to include it because we only have darks like here, here, and here. But even if we had like an in-between tone like throughout the piece, I think it would allow for more spaces for you to like bounce around the canvas. Yeah, it's just creating contrast points. Nah, I don't think there's such thing. It's just brushes you're more and less comfortable. Try the smudge tool. You're not a smudge tool fan? Yeah, it's just creating more moments of contrast and make your head a little bigger next time. Ooh, very cool stuff from head. My head? They're very statue-like. We have Indacia pulling up, going off the beat path, doing her own stuff. Very expressive work. I knew you'd do a good job with these. And then one from the class as well. Just in terms of like personal taste, like what you were thinking, how come you used a reference from the session for the colored one, but then used your own for the grayscale one? Like, what was your thought process behind that? Very cool, by the way. I really love the textures in the second one as well. Still have some really nice line work in the first one. This is Becky's sketches, by the way. This one over here. Nice down and dirty colored one. Yeah, a lot of actually, you know what? Probably the best session that I've seen from a lot of people, and I feel like a lot of that is people having room to be more expressive. But especially with some of the ones that I've seen from the people who have been here from the previous sessions, it looks like you've been putting a lot of practice in. They're very strong pieces. I know there were some people that were like iffy about their work. I know Benji, you said it kicked your ass. Is there like some tips that you wanted? Like what was your mindset when you went through yours? Let me see if I can find them again. There you go. Like why do you think this kicked your ass? Like what were you struggling with? Just getting the proportions right. I mean they're pretty good, man. Let me look. When it comes to being timed, yeah, like that's definitely not bad. And also, I feel like there are people who went out of their way to change the proportions on purpose, and it allowed them to have more stylistic pieces, and just in general pieces that have a lot more movement and flow going on. Like, for example, before I go too deep into your work, where was it? There's one person that really struck me with that. Where you at? Here we go. This was Becky. I really like the rounder shapes that we get from a piece like this. And like, if it was me in terms of taste, my own taste, I would like probably stretch it out to be a little taller, just so that we get more up and down motion. But other than that, I really like how exaggerated the hips come out from the side. I think it makes for a really interesting piece. And I like how that's sort of mirrored up through the arms as well. Really dramatic curves. And I think if you're being more expressive, as long as you have like a rhythm to it and some sort of pattern that makes sense to the viewer, you can sort of get away with proportions that are different from the reference. But yeah, I mean, even looking, comparing it to the reference right next to it, I'd say the only thing that's going like super off the beaten path is just pushing this torso out towards this way a bit more and like tucking in this side. And then obviously the head is a little small, so we could have made the head a little bigger. But other than that, like if you have it right next to each other, it's pretty on point, man. Yeah, already on it, good. Yeah, super dope. If you're revising it as well, I think that's good practice. Another thing, Benji, is you did a really good job with the shading. I know you're not super happy with like the line work. I think it would be cooler if you just like used a thinner brush so we could get more out of what you rendered. But in terms of like little moments around the chest and the hips and some of the thighs, I think you had a really mature grasp on the shading, and some of that comes through with the legs as well. I think if we got this to be a bit more uniform, and what I mean by that is like just having a consistent break on where we're going to make a transition in value. So like making these areas a bit more even. Of course, we can line it up to the reference, but this is just for example. But, you know, having an even break line and then trying to do a controlled smudge or blend in those areas. I think if we were just more uniform in areas like this, you're going to get a lot more value out of what you put down. But especially in the grayscale one, if you zoom out, I can see that there's a lot of careful shadows and shading that's slowly starting to be built up with your practice. I'd highly recommend doing another one of these on your own, because I'm seeing a lot of early value out of this from you. Yeah, yeah, it's definitely your stronger one. Yeah. If you're more painterly, like if you're not afraid to just like push the background, this one's underneath. Yeah, like if you're more painterly and like you're just working on one layer after a certain point, if you would only like carve into the shape and be like, I want the hips to be more dramatic, and you just like want to carve in a hard edge to push something around, also might be a good strat, especially if you're like doing just like 30-minute or 1 hour studies. But what we're looking at here is like another method, especially since the next one we're going to go into more imaginative work. This is just another method for incorporating form studies into a full figure or a figure with, you know, more creative elements. And all we're doing is we're just planning out things as basic shapes, same as before. So if we have a nice line sketch, we are going over, we're making our basic frame for like what the torso would look like, what a midsection would look like, anything that's going to help us plan out bringing together these shapes, as you can see. And then once we have our basic wireframe guy here, then we start filling in more forms. You know, we build up muscle. We start thinking about how we can incorporate those more advanced shapes, all the fats that are going in, until we build up the figure. And then once we have a basic figure, that's when we can start going back in and being like, okay, where are things that are happening in my basic form that I can be a bit more artisty with and start making random snakes and other elements as well. And even in your early sketches, we can go in and start thinking about the creative elements as basic forms. So this umbrella that this lady has is just a cone. That snake that we're going to add in later, if we wanted to like pop out that 3D look, it's just a series of cylinders or like a manipulated cylinder. If we wanted to have it like wrap around her neck there, For some reason, I forgot the word for neck. And even with the hair, like we can break that down into like an overlapping sphere. Start coming up with shapes to like move it around. You can do the same thing. If she's wearing like a dress, we can make a cone for the dress. We can start moving out that dress and thinking about how it would flow. Just different stuff like that. And any design element you have, especially if it's large, especially if you want it to be expressive, a nice cape, we can always just break it down into basic shapes and forms, just like we did our gestures in our figure studies. And it's just trying to come up with a way to incorporate that information and make it simple. And that's really what this little diagram here is showing. But yeah, that's all I have from myself. Next session, like I said, is silhouettes. We'll be doing a series of them and then adding creative elements. Thank you guys for showing up. Really nice work. I'll update the channel, and I will see you all in the next one.